Hello, good morning. Thank you to New York OCFS for bringing us together and to each of you for the leadership that you bring on behalf of young people across our state. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be with you this morning. I live in New York, as my background represents, and I unfortunately can't be physically in the state right now because I lead a foundation called CoLab. We're at the Constellation Fund, and we host our annual convening at around this time every year in Minnesota. So while I'm really excited about that, I'm really sorry that I can't be present with you all. And yet it's still truly an honor to be with a group that's intentionally small. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for us to interact with one another and for you to interact with each other. I understand that you're about 80 leaders working with Runaway and Homeless Youth Program grantees of OCFS across the state. I want you to feel comfortable with interacting with me. We'll have some discussion and engagement time after the presentation portion. And you should feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'll share my contact information so that we can all be in community with one another and share insights and lessons. And if I can provide resources that would be helpful for you, please don't hesitate to let me know. Your work is truly important to me. And as we'll get to very shortly, the kind of work that you do has really changed my life. And so I just want to thank you and make myself available as a partner and a collaborator to you in any way that I can be. Now, I know some of you are veterans of Runaway and Homeless Youth programs. You've been around for a long time and working in this field. Others are newer, and perhaps you've come from other systems like child welfare or other public systems work. Wherever you're coming from, I hope that you feel that you're welcome. And I hope that you feel that what is unique about Runaway and Homeless Youth programs versus other public systems that are maybe more formalized is that this really has become, over the last 40, 50 years, a community. It's become a movement. And for many of us, it feels like a kind of extended family. We hold each other accountable. We give each other support. We lift each other up. We share resources. And this work is tough. And I hope that that's something that you feel and that you felt as part of this work and that you feel it, especially today as you hold space with one another. And I hope that you'll see me as part of that community with you. You see, I've been welcomed into the Runaway and Homeless Youth movement since I was 15 years old. And so for a few years. And in this community, people have helped me buy my first suit. They helped me try my first sushi despite my skepticism when I first came into contact. They supported me in preparing my first speech and even telling off my first congressman on the Hill when I was about 16 years old, and had no tact, but had a lot to say. This is a movement with grassroots heart and national reach, and I hope that you'll see yourself as a contributor to it, as a participant within it, especially today as you're part of this really fantastic convening that OCFS has hosted at such a critical and important, challenging time for the state and for the nation on behalf of supporting youth who've experienced homelessness. Let's start with a little bit about why we're here, and in particular, why youth homelessness, why focus on this particular issue and this particular group. First of all, youth and young adult homelessness, we found through our research, is far more hidden and far more pervasive than previously understood, and we'll get back to more of that later. We also know that while youth homelessness is very pervasive, it doesn't look like the typical stereotypes that folks have around what homelessness means or what it looks like or where they find it, whether it's a panhandle or on the street or somebody on a tent. Most people are thinking of chronic adult homelessness, folks with severe mental illness, substance use disorders. That experience or representation reflects a very small proportion of what it means or what it looks like when we're talking about youth and young adult homelessness, which tends to be far more episodic in and out of homelessness, far more transient, and a lot of movement through different types of housing situations, whether they're a night at a friend's place, sleeping in a car, at a bus station, a place not meant for human habitation, cycling through these arrangements back at their house and then out again. And that makes it much more challenging, but also means that we have an opportunity to intervene earlier as homelessness is not yet quite as stuck or chronic. or represented the way that we tend to think about it. So there's a lot of education there that we can do with one another, with our communities. We also know that homelessness during youth and young adulthood has devastating implications throughout the lifespan. In fact, while we haven't yet had the data to fully replicate this study in the United States, in Australia, researchers analyzed a large data set on the reasons for adult homelessness, and they found that the single greatest pathway into older adult homelessness wasn't what we usually expect. It wasn't substance use, it wasn't domestic violence, it wasn't even eviction. The single most common pathway into adult homelessness was youth homelessness, by far. The single most common pathway into adult homelessness was youth homelessness. Now, that's really significant and worth reinforcing, because if we care about solving for the overall homelessness crisis in our country or in our state, this means that we have to start earlier. We have to intervene upstream with youth and young adults and treat this critically developmental period as a critical one for solving for homelessness and housing instability as a national challenge. Yet we have to take a youth-centric approach. And that's where a lot of our research is reinforcing that the way that we serve this population is really critical to be thinking about. And it's why your programs in particular, Runway and Homeless Youth Programs, play such an essential role in our community fabric in support of young people and in addressing our homelessness crisis. So you probably already know from my bio or the introduction that I'm a nerd. I like long walks on the beach and evenings of designing unbiased sampling strategies. It's kind of what I do. And yet we will come back to that. That's the sampling strategies. But this work for me is not abstract. And I want to reinforce that, like many of you, I have a personal connection to the cause that is what underlies my nerdiness, what underlies my commitment to building stronger data and using better data to improve outcomes for young people. I grew up in Florida. When I was 5, I grew up with been with my single parent mom with my little sister, and yet we lost our mother in a plane crash. My sister and I moved in then with our father, who struggled with addiction and mental illness. Home was chaotic and often traumatic. I ran away a lot, like many of the young people that we serve, sometimes to friends' houses or adults that were in my community that could take me in from time to time, sometimes to a church near my house because it had a field full of big oak trees and I felt peace sometimes and I could feel quiet and safe there. Yet in high school, when I was 15, I had a high school English teacher, Mrs. Littman, who spotted potential in me before I even saw it in myself. And first she saw it in academics and she noticed I was grappling with literature and reading, and she thought maybe I wasn't being challenged enough with coursework, even though my grades didn't necessarily reflect that. So she lobbied for me to get it in stronger, more challenging courses. And she also happened to be volunteering as an adult partner with a group of teenagers in the community who were starting Florida's first ever fully youth-driven teen center. Now, these weren't teens who were student government presidents or anything like that. For the most part, most were young people from traumatic experiences, often from low-income households themselves. And they had bonded together with caring adults to express their pain as a passion for something bigger than themselves. Now, I eventually showed up to my first teen council meeting after like 2 months to get this teacher off my back, because English teachers have special powers that persuade you to do things like that. And it changed my life because I'd never seen something that was such an incredible opportunity to be able to leverage my challenges for something so positive. So this slide that I'm about to show you here shows me at 16 years old now facilitating a strategy meeting, a youth council meeting with our youth and adult partners. Please don't mind the necklace. It was Florida in the 1990s. It's not something I would wear today, I promise. But the arrow here is pointing to Mrs. Littman. Mrs. Littman and these adults provided significant amount of support to us, and yet they really reinforced that this was a youth-led model. In fact, teens did everything from painting the walls to hiring and firing adult staff. And you want to see a nervous adult, put them in front of a group of teenagers, pen in hand. And the ones who made it through that, you knew were truly committed to the philosophy and the process of true youth-adult partnerships. You see, we were trusted not with what kind of pizza toppings we had. We were trusted with real decisions that affected our lives and the way the program was shaped. The county's Juvenile Welfare Board awarded us our first grant of $195,000. After that, a family foundation was so impressed by our kind of radical youth-led model that they had awarded us another $1 million to expand to 5 more centers. Now, that was a lot of money for a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds, and not everything was a great idea. Program sponsored Jello wrestling, for example. Well, that one kind of made the local news in ways that weren't always helpful, but nonetheless, even though that was tough to justify in a funder report, the fact that we could do everything from organize massive service events to construct whole program models to Jello wrestling in the full range meant that we truly were trusted. And whether it worked out or not, it was the process of the commitment to let us take risks and to support us in taking risks that we could learn from, and that this was not symbolic, but it was actually about genuine youth development and empowerment. And at 17, I was invited as a result of all of this to give a keynote address at the White House's first ever National Youth Summit to tell our story. Thereafter, I was traveling the country, doing talks and advocacy on youth empowerment and youth homelessness. Even Jay-Z had me come up to New York to share our experience in a social campaign that he had launched. The teens often that I work with usually tell me that I need to lead with that. But the point was, I was lucky. You see, many are not so lucky. And I want to just give one example of that for now. Take this quote by a young person who I spoke with not too long ago. This quote has a young person saying, "I was sleeping on the streets before I got arrested, sleeping in a bus station or in motels when I could. I took drugs not to think about it, not to think about the fact that I might not have somewhere to stay, that I might have to sleep on the streets. I'm ashamed of it. I just wanted stability. I didn't have anything stable, anywhere stable to live. I just wanted stability." This was actually my little sister. My sister's quote underscores the deep sense of hopelessness that comes from the indignity and the loneliness of homelessness and not even knowing where you're going to sleep the next night. You see, even in the same family, two young people can end up with very different opportunities and trajectories, and that ticks me off. In the richest country in the world, it ticks me off that we can continue to have lucky ones like myself and unlucky ones like my little sister and so many more in the community in which I grew up. It makes me even angrier that this luck is inequitably distributed, where the unlucky ones are far more likely to identify as LGBTQ, like my little sister, or as youth of color. And it makes me even angrier that the unlucky ones remain largely invisible. This is why I got into research, because young people like my sister remain invisible across our country. But that is a problem that we can solve for. Evidence and data can help make the invisible visible. Good research can shine light on our blind spots, and that's why I became a nerd. And I hope it's why you can take pride in being a nerd with me in this presentation and thereafter. Because I believe in the power of thoughtful research and a curious use of data in partnership with people with lived expertise to challenge our assumptions and to drive more effective actions. I want to share with you some of the work, just a little bit of the work that came from Voices of Youth Count. So I used to work in in the federal government, and I was shocked at that time to find that we lacked answers to even the most basic questions about youth homelessness. My bosses in government and other policymakers often asked, how many young people experience homelessness? Who are they? What are their characteristics? What do they think is important or what would help them? Which interventions are most effective or less effective at producing better and sustained results? And for too long, the answers to these really simple questions have been, we don't really know. Lots of people had ideas and thoughts and stories and anecdotes, but with good data, we could not produce good, credible answers. Ultimately, that gap motivated a national public-private partnership research initiative, the first of its kind, and it had bipartisan support from Congress, and it came to be called Voices of Youth Count. It's the largest national study of youth and young adult homelessness to date, and I had the privilege of leading this as the principal investigator while I was at Chapin Hall. Through Voices of Youth Count, we now have much better understanding of the problem based on credible data than we did several years ago. And once you see a problem, you can start to solve it. And that's why I'm here to discuss the research with you, because you hold critical frontline solving opportunities in the work that you do every day and with your colleagues. And none of this research ultimately matters without your action. I'm going to highlight some of the findings, but all of our research is freely available online and at Chapin Hall's website. And I strongly encourage you to take a look and use research and impact briefs that we created. They're really nice summary pieces on different issues from youth homelessness and foster care to certain subpopulations or rural youth homelessness. And these both capture key research insights as well as implications for policy and practice, co-developed by people with lived experience and by national and community advocates. So please look to these briefs, share them, use them, and talk about them with your colleagues in your communities. Chapin Hall's first nationally representative survey of youth homelessness surfaced alarming conclusions. We found that at least 1 in 30 adolescents ages 13 to 17 endures some form of homelessness within a 12-month period. With young adults ages 18 to 25, the prevalence climbs even higher. 1 in 10 young adults reported some form of homelessness within a 1-year period. Moreover, the prevalence rates were statistically equal between rural and non-rural communities. As a share of the population, youth homelessness is just as much of a problem in rural America as it is elsewhere. Youth homelessness, in other words, is not an East Coast, West Coast issue. It's not an inner city problem. It's an American problem. And yet, just because the rates are statistically equal between rural and urban communities doesn't mean that homelessness looks the same. The issue is far more hidden in rural communities, and that's because it's more likely to involve couch surfing and less likely to involve shelters, often because shelters or runaway and homeless youth programs are few and far between in rural and remote communities, as many of you know very well. And this requires special outreach and more innovative and better funded service delivery to be able to address that gap. We also know that the trauma and the hardship of homelessness among our nation's young people reflects the disparities that we see reflected in so many other adversities. Youth are at least twice as likely to experience homelessness if they're American Indian, Black, or Hispanic, and they're 4 times as likely to experience homelessness if they are also identify as LGBTQ compared to their peers who identify as white, heterosexual, and cisgender. With better data, we can act, we must act, and to move forward, we should tap into our history. For those newer to running homeless youth programs, especially those of you coming from more formalized systems, there's a remarkable origin story that I want to share just a little bit of with respect to the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act and what often and its state replications or adaptations in policy. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, too many youth fleeing unsafe homes were criminalized for seeking safety. Grassroots advocates, often working out of church basements, met young people with dignity, not judgment. It took tragedies to wake up policymakers, but in 1974, Congress passed what became the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, funding youth-specific shelters that did not require parental permission. That was revolutionary at the time. I know it's hard to recognize that now, but it recognized for the first time that sometimes a young person just needs safety before that they need anything else, and that not all families are necessarily sources of safety, at least not in critical moments when young people and their families need support. What's more, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act built something fundamentally different from traditional systems that involve youth-centered, but not system-centered systems. Well, those that were really built around the comprehensive, holistic developmental needs of young people, and meant low barrier, high engagement programs and services that now many of you operate today. In other words, come as you are. We'll figure it out together kind of rationale. It was relationships first and relationship centered because trust is the doorway to everything else. Ultimately, Runaway and Homeless Youth Programs espoused a strength-based, not a deficit-based model, which was really critical at the time and ingrained in law. And the principle, nothing about us without us, was clear as part of the advocacy slogans. Those are, or not just slogans, but as real design choices in the policy and how it was crafted. And they're just as necessary now, these principles, as they were then, if not even more so. What's also really important is that the Runaway and Homeless Youth Advocates had led the movement for positive youth development, which I think is really underrated in today's understanding of this history, which has since influenced strength-based approaches to engaging adolescents and young adults literally all over the world. I've worked for the World Bank on youth and gender issues. I've been to about 60 countries, and I've seen positive youth development principles literally used and reflected in training and in coursework and youth programs and policies all over the world. And that really started in large part with the contributions of folks like yourself who are advocates in the Runaway and Homeless Youth movement. And we see that reflected in the law itself, as you see on this slide. The early Runaway and Homeless Youth movement had focused on, very rightly, on survival and getting youth out of danger. And that remains a non-negotiable. But now I think we have the opportunity to think together to push the movement forward. I know there's still a lot to protect, especially in these times. And yet I don't want to lose sight of how we can continue to advance and improve our outcomes for young people. So this next chapter, I think, in the Runaway and Homeless Youth movement really can be about leaning more and more into thriving. At CoLab, my team invests in long-term actionable research on solutions to long-term upward mobility. The question for us is, what helps young people not just stabilize, as many homeless programs are set up to help people do, but actually to build adult lives with mobility and meaning, to get onto long-term pathways of thriving. And I want to share a little bit of data-driven insights on how we might think about doing that. While this isn't a comprehensive list by any means, I'll highlight 4 evidence-based drivers of mobility, economic and upward mobility, that can build more creatively into Runaway and Homeless Youth programs, into our models, and especially into our community coordination plans to optimize long-term impact. In other words, it's not all about what you can just fit into a life skills program or an independent living program or a shelter model. It's also about how Runaway and Homeless Youth programs coordinate and connect across a community to deliver a more youth-centered, holistic response to help young people truly get on pathways to thriving. Let me highlight a few key predictors of upward mobility where I think Runaway and Homeless Youth programs can be very catalytic. First is on opportunity proximity. Housing close to good jobs, good schools, and educational and training opportunities, as well as near other services, we know it now increases the odds of young people experiencing longer term economic mobility. When we can, let's not just house young people, but let's think really critically about connecting young people through their housing to places of opportunity, whether that's through transportation support or literally where we're helping young people find housing. For parenting young people, the benefits multiply across their children's number of years of exposure to high opportunity neighborhoods as well. Transportation access is really critical. Opportunity is meaningless if you can't reach it, if you can't access it. A young person stabilized on the edge of town with no reliable transit and only minimum wage jobs nearby is set up to stall out when age limits or subsidies end in these programs. So help with licenses, car access, or public transport passes, smart routing. These are mobility strategies in many more ways than one. Education and career skills in a skills-based economy are fundamentally essential. And this isn't just about enrollment or getting a person set up, but it's about providing full support to help young people acquire skills, education, degrees, and training, especially in fields that are linked to strong earnings prospects and benefits and good and sustainable jobs. Many young people experience homelessness while working. So simply getting employed and checking that box is far from sufficient from supporting their thriving and preventing future homelessness. We really have to think about quality and skills match to economic opportunity. And then finally, I want to highlight social capital, both in two forms, bonding and in bridging. Bonding ties and social capital are the ones that carry us. They're the ones that give us that emotional support, the bonds that we need to people that, whether they're mentors or friends or family, that can help us in our time of greatest need. But bridging ties are the connections that open doors. Bridging ties help get us ahead. They're among the strongest predictors of upward mobility. These means bridging ties to folks who have access to resources or jobs or who are not living in or part of poverty concentrated communities or social networks that can help young people advance and can alter young people's aspirations about what's possible. When I was 17 years old and the president of the Family Foundation that funded our teen centers met with me every week to prepare for that first White House keynote, that was bridging capital. And that had a critical role in helping me access so many other resources and ideas and possibilities that came thereafter. So if your program is already doing pieces of this, take a breath, let yourself be proud and to celebrate that, and then ask, what's the next inch we can move forward toward opportunity and not just survival for young people? One of the most exciting frontiers in youth homelessness is in trusting young people with real power and real resources. And we're seeing that manifesting right now across the country in cash plus solutions that are often getting now more and more integrated as part of Red Homeless Youth programs in really thoughtful and creative ways. When I was in New York City, or when New York City had asked my team and I, when I was at Chapin Hall, to conduct a comprehensive youth homelessness system assessment. We agreed to do so only if we could do it with the city's Youth Action Board and hire youth with lived expertise of homelessness onto our research team. And they were full members of the research team, co-published our reports. They trained our traditional researchers and they trained them. It was a really reciprocal, true team experience, and it produced better research and more actionable recommendations. And I want to give one example of that. For example, one recommendation became what we came to call the Trust Youth Initiative, the first direct cash transfer pilot for young adults experiencing homelessness combined with youth-directed supportive services. Every part of this, from the cash transfer amount to the duration, to the delivery mechanisms, to the types of supportive services that were offered, were co-designed in through a research and systematic process with youth with lived experience of homelessness. Some folks said it sounded radical, but American families actually already give their young adult children about $500 billion a year in informal financial support, according to a Merrill Lynch report. So this is something that we are already doing. It's just something that young people who are experiencing homelessness and young people from more adverse backgrounds don't have access to that same kind of trust and resource that we provide youth and young adults across our country more informally all the time. So this is something we have to be able to set up programs to do, and we have to test their effectiveness. This is not about abandoning services, it's about shifting power. So young people can practice mastery, make decisions, learn, and grow with their support. That's developmentally aligned, that's dignity aligned, and it's what many of your programs have been doing and moving towards for many years. And if you'd like more information on how we came about co-designing cash transfer or cash plus programs with young adults experiencing homelessness, I'd encourage you to check out this resource that's on the left-hand side of the slide on Chapin Hall's website. It walks you through that process and those design decisions and some of the data that's already out there that you can use. Now, let's move to prevention. Our research makes clear that we need to take a comprehensive approach to ending youth homelessness, just as we would for any other major health challenge, public health challenge, whether it's diabetes or HIV/AIDS or domestic violence or COVID-19. We tend to treat our homelessness crisis, including youth homelessness crisis, from a very crisis response triage model. We do not have a concerted prevention systemic response across our nation or a strong prevention policy framework. It'd be like treating the whole of a healthcare system as an emergency room. It doesn't make sense in healthcare, and it doesn't make sense with youth homelessness. So what can we do about that? We developed this simple tool, again, in partnership with young people and researchers and government agencies, to help communities and governments assess their efforts more holistically toward ending youth homelessness. This approach maps onto the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness's goals of ensuring that homelessness is rare, brief, and one time, but it takes a youth-specific lens. Of course, we need stronger, more youth-centric crisis response systems to make sure that youth already experiencing homelessness are quickly identified, housed, and supported. That need doesn't go away, and Runaway Homeless Youth programs continue to play a critical role there. But if we truly care about population level impact and driving down those prevalence estimates that I shared before, this crisis response model isn't enough. Our data show that half of the youth who reported experiencing homelessness in the last year, half of those nearly 4 million young people experiencing homelessness across our country in the last year, had experienced it for the first time. That means you could help every young person today who's experiencing homelessness get stably housed. And next year, we could have at least half as many experiencing homelessness again if we do not move upstream and if we do not take prevention and early intervention more seriously. Runaway Homeless Youth programs excel at meeting youth early in crisis relative to adult systems. That's one of the really important features of Runaway Homeless Youth programs. But to end youth homelessness, we have to push even further upstream towards primary prevention. Our research team, to that effect, co-designed a systems map with youth that puts Runaway Homeless Youth Services at the center of access and stabilization, and then stretches left towards prevention and right towards long-term thriving, helping young people, once they are stably housed, get onto those long-term pathways of thriving that we talked about earlier to ensure that they don't experience homelessness again. Youth told us the ends of this map, true prevention on one side and durable mobility on the other, are where communities still feel very thin for them. So let's listen to young people and let's thicken those endpoints. Of the tens of thousands of participants in the Voices of Youth Count research that we had included in our study all over the country, we invited 215 young people to share their stories in much greater qualitative depth. This work was what we called our in-depth interviews component, led by Professor Gina Samuels out of the University of Chicago. One of those young people who we spoke with chose to go by the pseudonym Bailey, had shared her story, for example, and we visualized many of these in much this way. We asked each young person to tell us where their stories of homelessness began. Bailey began her story at age 2. Between ages 2 and 11, she cycled in and out of family homelessness. At 11, her mother died by suicide and she entered foster care. Over the next few years, she moved between group homes and relatives, attempted suicide multiple times, and eventually Bailey left her home at 16. At 17, when we met her, she was in a youth housing program, hoping to enroll in Job Corps and rebuild her life. Every story was unique, but Bailey's, like so many others, revealed the same pattern of missed opportunities across education, child welfare, behavioral health, housing, and many others that you all could probably identify just by looking at this one case study alone. In fact, many of you probably are already identifying those missed opportunities for better programs, better policies across multiple systems that could have been implemented. And that's exactly the kind of problem solving we need before more young people have to go through and endure what Bailey did. Bailey's story also underscores the real world fluidity of instability and homelessness that I started with at the very top of this presentation, that many young people experiencing homelessness have to endure. It looks different for every young person, but it's that fluidity, it's that episodic nature of homelessness that's really important because it helps us understand why it's so hard to capture, but also why we have these multiple entry points for intervening earlier. And it also reinforced why homelessness for a young person looks and feels very different than those stereotypes that most people are used to. On this slide, we show that our survey data reinforced the critical role of engaging multiple public systems in primary prevention. Youth experiencing homelessness who we surveyed across the country were vastly overrepresented in having been involved in juvenile and criminal justice systems, in inpatient behavioral health systems, in foster care, and dropping out of high school. That alone is 4 major public systems that all could be doing more to identify early warning signs of youth homelessness and delivering those supports and services far more upstream than we currently are. Now, it's not the job of runaway and homeless youth programs to fix these systems, but in communities across the country, runaway and homeless youth organizations like yours are leading and can lead and support primary prevention efforts through coordination and education across multiple public systems and through significant local, state, and national advocacy. But we have to engage in that coordinated and concerted response to make a priority of youth homelessness prevention that accepts no excuses. Here's the hard part. Prevention doesn't come naturally in our policy ecosystem. You see, we're funded to focus on crisis above the waterline, the visible tip of the iceberg, so to speak. But the mass of the problem sits just underneath the surface of early adversities, missed flags, and uncoordinated handoffs. If we treat homelessness like the emergency room is the entirety of a healthcare system, we'll never bend the curve. We need upstream coalitions, running around homeless youth programs, working with schools, working with child welfare systems and behavioral health, juvenile justice systems, housing services and systems, philanthropy, and youth-led groups to commit to primary prevention goals with shared metrics and rapid response playbooks. And I think that's where your work, your leadership can play such a catalytic role, but you cannot do it alone. And that's something I really want to reinforce and recognize as well. So sometimes in all of this work, which sounds and is incredibly complex and incredibly challenging, we have to show what's possible. It can be easy to become defeated before we even begin. And for that, we have to model that possibility through our own efforts. And when we do that, so much it becomes truly exciting and realistic once we know it can be done and once other communities see it be done. But we have to be willing to be the ones that go first, despite the risks and despite the unknowns. And so that's the part that I want to challenge you to consider and to think about. You see, I'm an avid runner, a long distance runner, have been for a long time. I've been a competitive cross country and track runner since I was 14. Running helped to pay my way through school, but it also has been integral as a part of my life and my self-expression. Yes, I like masochism. And friends have asked me to explain this ostensibly masochistic habit for a long time. I've never really been able to come up with a cogent response. And at this point, it's just kind of like trying to explain why I eat breakfast. These pictures are of me in the Miami half marathon on the left and the New York City marathon on the left with or on the right with my Simba fanatic 4-year-old at the time celebrating with me. So you might imagine from this little bit of background about me why the geek neurons activated so strongly when I joined the University of Oxford's running team in grad school and trained weekly on the same track on which Roger Bannister managed to break the first 4-minute mile in 1954. I even got to meet him briefly before he passed away. And he was well known in my college and among the university community. And I want to share a little bit about why this matters. Why would I share this example? Well, let me tell you. For a long time, a long, long history of competitive running, no one could manage to break the 4-minute barrier. Many actually thought it was physically unattainable, like speculating that uh, biologically it couldn't be done. One runner had gotten down to 4:01 a decade before 1954, and then after that, no one could get below it until Bannister. And then on one blustery English day, Bannister ran a 3:59 mile. And mind you, it wasn't even the perfect conditions that everybody thought. If anything, would have to exist for this to occur. And yet, less than 6 weeks later, after Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, someone else ran a 3:58. Within the same year, the 4-minute mile had been broken twice more. In the following decades, many athletes would run sub fours, and more recently, about 100 people ran sub 4-minute miles just in one year in the last few years. And the world record now stands, I think, at 3:43. Bannister showed what was possible, and he opened the floodgates for other athletes in doing so. So Bannister's once unfathomable achievement is now seen by elite runners as difficult, but frankly unexceptional, and certainly achievable. Put another way, Bannister is best remembered not for the record that he set, though it was impressive at the time, but for the psychological barrier that he had shattered. New York, I believe, is positioned to lead nationally because we have a statewide network of runaway and homeless youth programs and deep practice experience reflected by the 80 leaders in the room today. We have system partners increasingly open to linked privacy protected data to find upstream signals and to track success over time and across public systems. We have philanthropy, we have universities, we have youth leaders ready to co-design and test and scale solutions that work. Imagine if a few communities across New York truly committed themselves to showing that preventing and ending youth homelessness is possible in the richest country in the world. I know that it can be done. And perhaps those communities too would annihilate the psychological barrier for other communities to follow. Perhaps they would be the ones to take down the myth that homelessness in the richest country in the world is just a fact of life, that it's the way things will always be. Let me end where I began. Youth homelessness is solvable. Not easy, but solvable. We know more than we ever have about who's affected, when and how to intervene, and what supports upward mobility and thriving over the long haul. We have a movement with grassroots origins, a body of evidence, and a new generation of leaders ready to build the next chapter. Here's your call to action, if you'd like one. Honor the origins. Keep youth-centered, low-barrier relationship first practice non-negotiable, the origins of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Movement that brought us to where we are today. Yet push upstream, build prevention coalitions and warm exits from institutions. Design programs and coordinated responses, not just for surviving, but for thriving. Think about opportunity, proximity, transportation, education, and skills, and bridges of social capital that can help young people get ahead. Share power. Trust young people with real decisions, real resources. We're not talking about pizza toppings. We're talking about decisions that affect the programs that affect their lives and the policies that affect their lives. And finally, Take care of yourself and each other, and remember to practice joy. This work is emotionally demanding. In all of the intensity of this work, don't lose sight of the moments like today for connection, for growth, and for hope that reminds us of why we do this. And yes, sometimes joy includes Jello wrestling. I'm not saying you should add it to your program model, but I'm not saying that either. Brief Briefly, I just want to say to the OCFS team, thank you for convening this. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for your leadership and bringing folks together. And to every Runaway and Homeless Youth Program leader here, thank you for your courage and for your craft. For the young person who's going to walk through your door this week or next week, you might be the person who changes their story from surviving to thriving. And together, we can ensure that there's no such thing as an unlucky youth. Thank you. Thanks so much. And now I'm happy to take some time for question and answer.